The title of this session is called Alien Files, and we refer to them as A files. Elizabeth Burns is our speaker today. In this session, you will learn about the alien or A files, that they're a rich source of biographical information for family research, and you will learn how to complete a successful request. The A files contain United States immigration documents generated and collected since the mid-20th century. These documents hold a wealth of data, including visas, photographs, applications, affidavits, correspondence, and much more. Elizabeth Burns is an archivist with the National Archives at Kansas City. She serves as the lead archivist for the Alien File reference area. Prior to joining the National Archives staff, she held positions at the Harry S. Truman National Historic Site, the Missouri History Museum, the Herman T. Pott National Inland Waterways Library, and the Harry S. Truman Presidential Library and Museum. She received a bachelor's degree in history at Truman State University and a master's degree in history and museum studies at the University of Missouri, St. Louis. Elizabeth?
Hello, I'm Elizabeth Burns. Today I'm going to be talking to you about the alien files, more commonly called A files. All of the information that I've included in my PowerPoint presentation is available in the handouts that are on the virtual genealogy website. But let's go ahead, let's get started. During today's presentation, I'm going to talk to you, provide you with a little bit of background information about the alien files, give you some examples of basic content that you can find, show you some of the interesting items that can show up within the records, and then walk you through the record request process. The Alien Registration Act of 1940 required that all aliens over the age of 14 go to their local post office and register their alien status with the federal government. As part of this process, each individual was assigned an alien registration number, and beginning on April 1st of 1944, the Immigration and Naturalization Service, INS, began using this number to create individual case files called alien files, or A files. A files contain all records of any case of an alien not yet naturalized as they passed through the United States immigration and inspection process. A files were created for a number of reasons. Anything from, I've lost my alien registration receipt card, can you send me a new copy? To, I have an immigrant relative who'd like to enter the country and I'd like to work on their behalf. And also to things such as law enforcement investigations, which were brought against aliens for possible illegal acts. A files are a rich source of biographical information in that they contain relatively modern immigration documents all in one file. Since the 20th century, the United States has collected an increasing amount of information from immigrants, and A files from the mid-1900s hold a wealth of data, including visas, photographs, applications, affidavits, correspondence, and more. It's also important to note that although the files were created beginning in 1944, documents and information included could be much older than that, and they could even date all the way back to the birth of the person, which could be in the mid-1800s in some cases. Documents may also be included that date up to the time of any final action related to the alien. This could be naturalization, death, deportation, and so on. It's important as you're beginning to consider whether the individual you're researching could have an A file to kind of go through this table that we've put together. It helps you kind of walk through, does my person even meet the parameters to have an alien file? So let's go through a couple of them just so that you understand how to read the table. If the individual that you're seeking died before August 1st of 1940, they will not have an A file or an alien registration number. That doesn't mean that there aren't other records available at the National Archives that could be of use, though. For example, ship passenger manifests could be used as a source of information. If the individual that you're seeking became naturalized between September of 1906 and August of 1940, they will not have an A file or an alien registration number. They would have been naturalized prior to the alien registration of 1940. Again, this doesn't mean that there isn't going to be documentation, though. It may be worth reaching out to the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service, USCIS, which is what used to be INS, and they have a genealogy program that maintains a variety of records, including any A files that have not yet been transferred to the National Archives, as well as other immigration and naturalization files, including certificate files, that we call C files. INS kind of changed the way that they did the record keeping over time, and beginning in April of 1956, anybody who naturalized, all of their documentation was consolidated into the A file, rather than having a certificate file or C file created. So it's important to consider not only when the person was alive, but their naturalization status at various points during their time in the United States. Currently, there are more than 450,000 A files which have been transferred to the National Archives. These files represent individuals who were born 1910 and prior. Many of the records are coming into the National Archives at Kansas City, where I'm located, and those represent the entire country as well as U.S. territories. But it's also important to note that there are a smaller number of files that are being transferred to the National Archives at San Francisco. In San Francisco, they're maintaining some of the A files that were created out of the Reno, Guam, Honolulu, and San Francisco INS district offices. It's also important to note that additional records will continue to come into the National Archives that will extend that date of birth from 1910 on to a more current date of birth. And so currently, though we don't have all the files for individuals born 1910 and prior, that is our date cutoff, and so be cognizant of it when you're working to make a request. So now that you have a little bit of an idea of what the A files are, let's go into some of the basic content that you might find. Now, when you're working with the A files, you need to realize that not every A file is the same. In fact, all of them are different from the next file that you may come across. The content in the file is entirely dependent on that person's interaction with the federal government. So some files might be 2 pages in length, other files might be hundreds of pages in length, but no two file is going to have the same documents. So what I'm going to discuss here are some of the records that you'll more consistently find within the files that are maintained by the National Archives currently. The Alien Registration Form, or AR-2, was the form that was completed during the 1940 Alien Registration. This document is a 15 multi-part question form that was filled out. It includes things such as name, aliases, when and where you were born, when and where you entered the country, occupation, organizational memberships, do you have prior military service? Have you tried to become naturalized in the United States at any point? Now, just good, basic biographical information that can serve as a great jumping-off point for continuing your genealogy research. It's important to think of it that way, too, as a jumping-off point. Now, you could take any of the information provided here, and it's possible that you could find supporting documentation or related records. For example, let's say that you haven't been able to track down somebody's passenger arrival record, but you find that they have an A file, and on this alien registration form, they note that they entered the United States in New York in July of 1920 aboard the SS Allegari. You can take that information, go to the passenger arrival list, and hopefully you'll be able to kind of get things lined up. Also, let's say that the person listed their occupation as a railroad worker. It may be worth looking into Railroad Retirement Board records. Or if they listed that they had a naturalization that they had attempted. So maybe they have a declaration of intention or a petition for naturalization that you could track down that might be available at another National Archives office or perhaps at one of the local courts. it's always worth looking at the information that's provided on these forms and seeing if there's something more that you can do with it. The next record we're going to talk about is the agency name check form. This was a form that was utilized by the FBI, and again, kind of builds on that, obtaining basic biographical information. But you get some exciting additions here. Oftentimes you'll see information about parents, spouses, prior residences. This can be very useful in continuing to build the picture of what this person's life looked like. Another form that shows up is the immigration visa and alien registration. This is a kind of later version of the alien registration form that was used in 1940. It combines the visa application process and the alien registration process into one form. Again, a lot of the good basics about the individual, information about the family. You can see here you gain a photo, and that can be extremely exciting. Being able to put that face to the name can really make a difference when you're doing your genealogy research. The other exciting thing with this particular document is there are often supplementary records that are attached or included. These could include birth certificates, marriage certificates, a lot of original records from the country of origin. Now, many of them may be in foreign language, so it can be a little tricky to make out what they are, but it's exciting to have these show up because you may not be able to find them anywhere else. And then the last one we'll talk about is the address report card. A lot of people kind of blow this off when they're doing their research because they think you're not getting much information out of this. You're getting the person's name and their address and the date that they submitted this report card. The way that you need to look at this, though, is to see it in a bigger picture. Let's say that you've lost track of somebody. You know in the 1940 census that they were listed in New Jersey, and you haven't been able to find any documentation of them after that point. These address report cards can help fill in those gaps. Not only are you gaining their addresses in census years, but you're gaining non-census year addresses. So let's say maybe they moved to California. You could pick up that trail and continue your research in a way that you may previously have not been able to. There are also a lot of interesting items that show up within the files. I've already kind of hinted at a couple of them. But again, these are things that aren't necessarily going to show up in every single file, but it's worth being aware of them because it's extremely exciting when they do show up. The first one I want to highlight are what I'll call vital records. Birth certificates, marriage certificates, baptismal certificates, sometimes even death certificates show up in these files. And this includes things for both the subject of the file and occasionally also for third parties. So, spouses, children, parents, any kind of connection that may have needed to be made to supplement other kinds of documentation that they were providing to the federal government at that point. These are the kinds of records that a lot of times, unless you're able to go and visit that foreign country, and let's say you know exactly where they were born and you have a connection to that local church or that local city or whatever the case may be, this may be the only way you ever find this kind of documentation. So it's something that can make it a one-stop shop for some of our genealogists, but again, setting your expectations, this isn't something that shows up in every single file. Another one I wanted to mention is the application and permit to re-enter. First off, you're seeing, you get a photo, and again, that is an amazing addition to any piece of research that you're doing. With this, you're getting some of the basics, you get a physical description of the person, but the nice thing here is that you're able to kind of track this person coming in and out of the country. Were they going to visit family? Were they traveling on business? You're getting a lot of good information that, again, just kind of builds the story. And then there are just a lot of random things that will show up in the file from time to time. I'm specifically going to highlight the green sheet that's showing up on the left side of the screen right now. The notice, this file is not consolidated. This is a piece of paper that shows up in a lot of files. It was inserted by kind of the bureaucratic side of INS to hint off and tip off any investigators who may be using the file as a source that they shouldn't stop their research here. There could be more out there that INS had gathered at some point. And I tell my researchers that that's the approach that they should take with this as well. This isn't a for sure that there's more documentation, but it does mean that it's worth the look. It's worth taking the time to see what else might be out there. And then a final thing to point out is that naturalization paperwork can show up in these files. Again, that began in April of 1956 when INS changed their record-keeping system. But this could include anything from the Declaration of Intention, the Petition for Naturalization, and all those related forms, the application to gather information for the petition, and all of those seemingly endless forms that people had to complete as they were working to get naturalized. The exciting thing is that if the person did complete naturalization, their certificate of naturalization will show up in the file. And this is not something that normally shows up at the National Archives. There were only ever 2 naturalization certificates created, one that was kept by INS and one that was given to the person when they completed naturalization. So a lot of times these don't show up with the other naturalization documents that can show up in the National Archives holdings. So it's very exciting to get to see this. So we've talked a little bit about what the files are. We've gone over what you might expect to find in a file. Now let's talk about how do you place your request? What does a good request look like? We currently receive A-file requests in written format. That can be either email, postal mail, or fax, and I'll provide all of that contact information at the end of my presentation. If you're wanting to come and visit on site, you are welcome to come and view the files and use them up for on-site research. We do ask that you set an appointment, and we ask for 48 hours notice if possible. This gives us a chance to retrieve the file from off-site storage, and it also gives us an opportunity to screen the files for any third-party information that may need to be redacted. And we really want to work with you and make an excellent research experience, so you giving us time to prepare and working with us, just make sure that your visit is a fantastic one. Currently, we are using the standard National Archives fee schedule, which means that the charge is $20 for the first 25 pages of photocopying. Any additional pages are 80 cents per page. If you came and visited and viewed the file on site, you'd be welcome to use our copiers for 25 cents per page. Anytime that you would place a request with me, what you would be receiving in response is a little bit of detail from the file to aid in confirming a match to the individual that you are seeking, as well as a breakdown of the number of pages the file contains so that we can get to what the total fee would be if you'd like to order a copy. So in placing your request, it's important that you include some good basic information so that I can successfully retrieve the file. At minimum, I ask that you provide the individual's complete name, their alien registration number, and then also the National Archives identifier that is connected with that person's file. It's also helpful to include the accession number and box number. Now, I know some of this may sound scary, but I promise you it is all very, very easy to find, and I will walk you through all of it so that you can go out right after this presentation and hopefully find some of your family within our holdings. It's also helpful when you're making a request, and this goes for whether it's an A-files request or any other kind. If you provide a little bit more context, if you give us some more biographical information, it'll often help us on our end, as the archivist working with you, to be able to figure out, is this a match to who you're wanting? Is there other kinds of information we should be providing you? So the more you give us, the more we have to work with. Now, before we actually go out and kind of walk through the search process, I wanted to show you what you're going to see so that you understand kind of from the beginning everything that you're going to be looking at as you get into our online catalog. All of the A-files have been entered individually into our online public access system, our online catalog through archives.gov. And when you do a search, the results are going to populate, and they'll look like what you see toward the top of the screen. Alien Case File 4, the person's name. Below that, you'll see the National Archives identifier and a local identifier. You'll see that these records come from the Immigration and Naturalization Service, and then a few other details. When you're looking at it, automatically you already have most of the information that you need to place your request with me. You have the individual's name, you know that National Archives identifier, and the local identifier actually includes the alien registration number, which is that A, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 kind of number. It includes the accession number and the box number. If you gave me just this information, I could go out, retrieve the file, and be ready to go. It's important, though, when you are doing your research in our online catalog, that you take a few extra steps to make sure that you're placing a strong request. If you went ahead and clicked on that title, that alien case file for Regina Pilas in this particular instance, you would open up and you'd see the full description for that file. As you scroll down the page, you would see a scope and content note. Always read the scope and content note. This is where we've provided additional information for you about the subject of the file. This could include the date of birth, country of origin, parents' names, and so on. It's also important to note the location of the record. Again, there are going to be A files in both Kansas City and San Francisco, and you want to be sure that you're placing your request to the correct office. So always check to make sure, and it'll give you all the contact information you need. Not only our postal address, but it'll also provide you with our fax number and the email address that you would use to place a request for that particular A file. Now, as I mentioned, the scope and content, we've really done our best to try to include as much information as possible. When we received the files from Citizenship and Immigration Service, they gave us a data scrape, which included a lot of basic information about each file. This included the person's name, their alien registration number, date of birth, and then depending on the person who was doing data entry that particular day, we could also have their date of entry into the country, their parents' names, information about their naturalization. It's extremely important to read that scope and content note. I can't emphasize it enough. So let's walk through a request. If you were beginning from scratch and wanted to find out if there was something worth sending an email about. If you go to our main website, which is www.archives.gov, on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see a box for Research Our Records. When you click that box, it'll open a new page, and you'll see a box that says Search Online, and within that, you'll be able to select the online catalog. When you select the online catalog, it'll bring you into our online public access system. Now, you can search right from this main screen. You can start typing in the person's name, first name, surname. Let's say maybe you've gone out and you've gotten some naturalization paperwork from a different National Archives office. If the person naturalized after 1940, if you flip that petition over to the back side, their alien registration number should show up there. Again, that's that A1234567 kind of number. If you take that number and pop it into this search, you can really quickly determine whether it's a file that we maintain or something that you're going to have to talk to the Citizenship and Immigration Service about retrieving a copy of. Now, the thing to keep in mind, if you search straight from that main page, let's say you're putting in somebody's name. In this case, I put in Antonio Grande. You're searching all of the online catalog. You're not limiting yourself to only A files. You're saying anything that the National Archives maintains. This means that you could end up with a lot of results. In this case, when I searched on Antonio Grande, I got 189 results that matched. And you can see just by looking that a lot of these aren't going to be a match. It's also important, if you're not familiar with our online catalog, to kind of familiarize yourself with the formatting of the results that are going to populate. So I'll give you a brief overview, and then I suggest when you have time that you go out and spend a little time looking at it yourself. The way that the results show up within the online catalog is actually divided into sections along the right-hand side of the page. You'll see the first section is online holdings. This means anything that has a digital image attached. As you continue to scroll down the page, you'll find that there is a description-only section and archives.gov. Description-only means that there's no digital image attached, but you are getting a description. This is where the A files are going to show up. Below that, you have the archives.gov, which means that they've searched the National Archives website, and there might be some kind of, maybe a blog entry or some other kind of website within the National Archives page that could be useful and match up to your needs. So when we're looking at this, we've got our description only. If you click on that, view all descriptions only, that'll bring up the full list of all of the records that match, in this case, Antonio Grande within the online catalog. Now you'll see that the first three, the title of them is Alien Case File for the person's name. And that's always what you're going to want to be looking for if you're looking for an A file. But you'll note there are quite a few other kinds of results that are populating here. Toward the bottom of the page, you see there's a special file of letters received. There's a service file of some kind. Now, this is when it becomes really important again. You may be tempted to think this is an A file, but unless the title says alien case file for the person's name, and, if you click on the link and you go in and you read the full description and it doesn't say A file, it's not an alien file. That doesn't mean that it might not be useful to your research, but if you submit a request to me for it, I'm not going to be able to help you. I'll just have to refer you to the office that's there. That's why we've listed the locations in the online catalog, so it's always good to scroll all the way to the bottom of the description and know who you're needing to work with to place your request. So what I suggest is actually that you narrow your search a little bit. If you open up the online catalog and you're on that main page, you can type alien case files in quotation marks, and when you hit search, you'll see that the results that populate include two series called alien case files. The first one is the ones that are maintained in the Kansas City office where I am. The other one, you'll see in that third line down, that creator line, that it says the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service's San Francisco field office. So you know that those are the A files that are maintained by the National Archives at San Francisco. Now, for the purposes of our demonstration today, I'm going to have us work through the ones that are in Kansas City. But again, if you have somebody who lives near Reno, Guam, Honolulu, or San Francisco, it is worth going ahead and checking both of these to make sure that your individual doesn't have a file in one or the other of the offices. So I went ahead and I clicked that first alien case files, and it brings me into the full description for that particular set of records. I can see that there are 456,334 individual files that are described within this. That means there are that many individuals that we have files for. And I also see there's a button there where I can search within this series. Now that means that I have the opportunity to go ahead and limit myself to only A files. So when I click that and I go ahead and do a search, again I did mine on Antonio Grande, I'm now only going to see A file results populate. So if I go ahead and were to click that, view all description only, and select one of them, I'd be able to go in and start looking. Now, you might have seen there were quite a few Antonio Grandes that came up in that list. It was down to 6, but that's still quite a few if you're trying to decide if it's your Antonio or not. So this is where it becomes very important to read each description to see if it's the Antonio you want. And when you open a description, at the top, you're going to see that National Archives identifier and that local identifier, which again are what you would need to provide to me to make a reference request. And as you scroll down the page, you're going to see that scope and content note. In this case, we see that this Antonio Grande was born in February of 1895 in Italy. But let's say that I know that my Antonio was born 1876 in Spain. This may make me question whether this is the Antonio I'm wanting or not. I may not request this file. So, you've searched in the online catalog and you don't find anything. You don't find any matches to the person that you're wanting. What does that mean? If you can't find your individual in the online catalog, it's because the National Archives doesn't currently maintain the records you're seeking. This does not mean that a record doesn't exist, though. As I mentioned, the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service has a lot of the alien files, any of them that have not yet transferred to the National Archives, that they maintain. And you can gain access to them through their genealogy program. And their website is www.uscis.gov/genealogy. It's also important to keep in mind that the National Archives will continue to receive these files. So we may not have your person today, but that doesn't mean that we won't have them a few months or a couple of years down the road. It's always worth checking back in the online catalog to find out who we have, who we've added. And if you want to learn more about the A-files, we've actually created an A-files website. If you go to the National Archives website, you can search for alien files and find the result. I've also provided the list, or the link in your handouts that you can obtain from the virtual genealogy website. If you're interested in finding out more about the National Archives at Kansas City, you can follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook. We hope that you'll join us online. We have a lot of content that we share there and a lot of information that might be useful to your research. And here's the contact information if you're interested in submitting an A-file request. Our email is afiles.kansascity@nara.gov. So if you're wanting to submit an A-files request, this is the email that you'll use. If you're placing other kinds of requests, please be cognizant that you're sending your request to the correct email address. So I'd like to open it up to questions at this point.
We have a question that's come in. It's about how does someone know if a person's a citizen or not? So their specific question is, if there is no A file for someone, can we assume that they are a citizen? And how do you check?
I wouldn't necessarily automatically assume that somebody became a citizen. Citizenship is not a requirement, and actually a high percentage of people haven't naturalized throughout history. So it's always safer to assume that somebody isn't naturalized until you've gotten the proof that they did pursue that. When you're looking to find out if somebody naturalized, let's say that you've searched within the online catalog, you didn't find a match, maybe you know where they lived. It's worth tracking down to see, let's say, for example, that you know somebody was living in St. Louis, Missouri. You don't know if they naturalized. You looked in the online catalog and didn't find an A-files match. You could always contact my office here in Kansas City and say, does this person show up in your naturalization records? And we could do a search within our holdings to find out. And all of the National Archives offices could complete that for you. We all maintain different states, so it's good to go and find out what the coverage is for that particular office. Like my office here in Kansas City, we have records for Iowa, Kansas, Nebraska, and Missouri. And we also, in some cases, for example, with naturalizations, we have records for the Dakotas as well. But that's a possibility in tracking down somebody's citizenship. When it comes to, let's say that you think that they were not naturalized as of 1940, it may be worth going through the process for the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service to see if they maintain some kind of record that could be useful to your search as well.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And then we have one more question that's come in from the public. They love your presentation, and they want to know if your presentation will become available as a PowerPoint slide on the internet. So if we took an Adobe PowerPoint version of your slides, would that be available online?
It could be. Honestly, I've taken a lot of the information from my presentation and put it in the handout that's on the virtual genealogy website. So you may want to check that out first because you may get all the information you need there.
Thank you. That's all the questions that we have. Thanks so much.
Oh, thank you.